Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. I am joined here today in Bute House by the co-leaders of the Scottish Green Party, Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater. And I'm absolutely delighted to confirm that the Scottish Government has reached a proposed cooperation agreement with the Scottish Greens. Working together to build a greener, fairer, independent Scotland is groundbreaking in both Scottish and perhaps even more so UK politics. Most importantly, though, it is an agreement that meets the challenges and the opportunities of our time. Scotland is, of course, much more than our politics, but it is through our politics that we express our hopes for a better future and then turn those hopes into reality. We live in a time when the challenges we face have rarely been greater. The climate emergency, recovery from a global pandemic, an assault by the UK government on the powers of our own parliament, and the consequences to our economy, society, and our place in the world of a disastrous Brexit that Scotland did not vote for. And yet, despite the magnitude of those challenges, many of them global, today's politics can too often feel small, polarised, divided, and incapable of meeting the moment. This agreement is intended to change that in Scotland. It is about doing politics and governance better. Cooperation and collaboration in place of division and acrimony is, in my view and indeed my experience, what most people want to see much more of from their politicians. It is also essential if we are to find the solutions needed to solve the problems confronting the world today. And of course, that spirit of cooperation and consensus building is very much in keeping with the founding principles of the Scottish Parliament. Our parties will, of course, retain our distinctive identities. This is not a coalition, and we do not agree on everything, but we are coming out of our comfort zones to focus on what we do agree on. Despite all of the risks inherent in any decision of two parties to cooperate more closely, we are choosing to work together. And we are doing so not out of political necessity, but for the common good. The agreement delivers bold policy action on pressing issues, a commitment to more affordable housing, a better deal for tenants, and action to tackle poverty and inequality. Steps to accelerate our transition to net zero, more support for active travel, transformation of home energy, and a 10-year transition fund for the North East of Scotland. A focus on green jobs and fair work, and a sustainable recovery from COVID. And action to improve mental health and reform public services, including the establishment of a national care service. We also, in this agreement, reaffirm our shared commitment to securing independence for Scotland and to giving people the right to choose our country's future through a referendum. The agreement also sets out the processes of cooperation and consultation that will enable a stable parliamentary majority for the delivery of the Scottish Government's legislative and policy programme. And as part of that, for the first time ever in UK politics, it will see Greens enter national government as ministers, working in a spirit of common endeavour, mutual challenge and collective responsibility to deliver for the people we serve. Now, in the coming days, this agreement will be scrutinised by our respective parties. I will commend it strongly and wholeheartedly to mine. But the publication of this agreement today undoubtedly marks an historic moment. It recognises that business as usual is not good enough in the times we are living through. It grasps that out of great challenge, a better world and a better Scotland is capable of being born. But it understands that achieving it will take boldness, courage and a will to do things differently. That is what we offer. I want to thank the Scottish Greens for the constructive process that has led us to this Bute House Agreement today, and say how much I hope that we will work together in the years ahead to secure the greener, fairer, independent Scotland that we know is possible. I'll now ask Patrick and then Lorna to say a few words before we take questions from the media. Patrick.
Thank you, First Minister. This is indeed a historic moment. This deal would see the Greens entering government for the first time ever in Scotland or anywhere in the UK. And it couldn't come at a more important time. The last 18 months have been an incredibly difficult time for us all. And as we seek to rebuild our lives and our economy, we really must seek to do things differently. We must build a fairer, compassionate country. And we must do everything in our power to tackle the climate and nature emergencies and deliver a just transition for all of Scotland. And that's what this deal will do. It means that our parties will be working together to deliver a bold and ambitious programme to deliver a green recovery from COVID, a new deal for tenants, and a fundamental change in approach on transport. It will put two Green ministers into the heart of government, advocating for the climate and for a fairer, greener Scotland. But fundamentally, it's also a new approach to politics. The SNP and the Scottish Greens are different parties. We agree on some things, disagree on others, and those distinctive voices can and will remain. That's why this isn't a coalition in the traditional sense, but that mustn't mean that we can't cooperate for the good of the people of Scotland, our climate, and our environment. To work together where we've got common ground, challenge each other to deal with disagreements constructively, and yes, to deliver a referendum on independence when we emerge from the pandemic, as both of our parties pledged to do in the recent campaign. Next week, Scottish Green Party members will have the decision on whether we take this historic step, and I look forward to engaging with them in the days to come. Together, we can, and I believe will, make history.
The UN scientists at the IPCC last week confirmed what we all already know from the images of fires and floods across the world. The climate crisis is accelerating, and we have to act now. The stakes simply could not be higher, and with the COP26 climate conference coming to Scotland, we are in a position to show real leadership on climate. We need to cut Scotland's emissions fast. Here are 3 ways that this deal would do that. 1, we would deliver a radical shift in transport spending. 10% of all transport spend would go towards making cycling, walking, and wheeling safe and accessible for all. And we would invest £5 billion over this Parliament in Scotland's rail network. 2, we cannot tackle the climate emergency without improving Scotland's homes and buildings. We have therefore agreed an accelerated and expanded £2.8 billion programme that would support everyone to make the changes that we need over the coming decade. 3, we would accelerate the rollout of renewables and double the size of the onshore wind industry, creating thousands of good quality jobs. As an engineer from this sector, I am particularly excited about this. This deal is about people as well as planet. Together, we would deliver a new deal for tenants, giving tenants more rights, introducing rent controls to help tackle Scotland's housing crisis. We would make bus travel free for young people, create a new national park, and much more. The Scottish Parliament was founded upon the principles of accountability, democratic participation, and equality. We, as elected representatives, must constantly strive to live up to these principles, and it could not be more important than just now. And that is why we are proud of this agreement that we are publishing today. It's why we are pledging to work together to build a greener, fairer, and independent Scotland. And it's why we are recommending this agreement to our parties.
Thank you to both Patrick and Lorna. We will now move to take questions from journalists. We have, as you would expect, a long list of journalists wishing to ask questions. We will do our best to get through all of them. I'll go firstly to Glenn Campbell from the BBC.
Thank you. To you, First Minister, does this agreement make an independence referendum any more likely, given the opposition to that from the UK government? And to the Greens, what are the chances of your party signing up to this? Because you've obviously had to make some pretty important compromises in exchange for going into government.
Thanks, Glenn. For my part, I am determined that there will be an independence referendum in this Parliament. I said in the election, this agreement reiterates that COVID permitting, that will be in the first half of this parliamentary term. I don't want that as an end in itself or as some abstract ambition. I believe Scotland should be independent so that we can better equip ourselves to recover from COVID in the way that I think a majority of people across our country wishes to do, towards a greener, fairer Scotland, and one that learns the lessons of the past 18 months and more. And of course, a Scotland that looks outward to Europe and the world, not one that is forced to look inward by the Brexit-obsessed government of the UK. This agreement, I think, it's not about making it more likely. I think it makes it harder and indeed impossible on any democratic basis for a UK government to resist the right of the Scottish people to choose their own future. The three of us standing here and our respective parties want that future to be an independent one. But the core principle of democracy is that it should not be us or any other politician who decides the future. That should be and will be, in my view, a matter for the Scottish people. I'll hand over now to perhaps Patrick to address the question to the Greens.
Thanks very much, Glenn. The Greens, as you know, pride ourselves in being a very democratic party. This agreement hasn't been just hammered out by the three of us behind closed doors. As soon as the possibility of a discussion about this emerged, we asked our members what their priorities were, and we've worked hard to act on those priorities. So as we go into a week of debate within the party and then an all-member extraordinary general meeting that will happen next weekend, I'm very confident and hopeful that Greens across the country will see this as an extraordinary opportunity. And there could not be a more important moment. Just after we've been given a code red for humanity, and just before the Global Climate Conference comes to Glasgow, there could not be a more important moment for Green politics to take this step forward. And I think the party members will see a huge amount to be excited about in this agreement.
Just to address the second part of your question, Glenn, it's more a question of that the agreement sets out areas where we will disagree, where the parties disagree, but we can disagree like grown-ups, while at the same time finding areas of cooperation where we can move forward and make significant progress on job creation and on building up our renewable energy sector and many other areas.
Thanks. James Matthews from Sky.
Thanks very much, First Minister. You've alluded to the fact that Green Party members will have to ratify this deal. Can I ask a question that they will want to know the answer to? And can I ask you each to answer this with a yes or a no for the sake of clarity? Are you against development of the Campbell oil field off Shetland?
I think politics and the challenges we face, with the greatest of respect, Jim, demands more than simplistic yes-no answers. And again, if you don't mind, I will answer questions in my own words, not in the words that others invite me to use. I set out my position on Campbell last week. I suspect the my Green colleagues here will set out the view that Greens have expressed as well. I do think, and this agreement recognises that there are significant questions about whether, in the face of the Code Red climate emergency, we should be continuing with unlimited fossil fuel extraction. And I think that's a question that people across Scotland and indeed the world are asking. And therefore I've set out to the Prime Minister, powers over this still lie with the UK government, not my choice. That is the constitutional reality. That in cases of fields like Campbell, where licences were granted many years ago, 2 decades ago in that case, but have not yet started production, there should be a reassessment of licences against a climate test in the same way that new licences will be subjected to the climate test. And we've got to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels, which is some of what the steps in this agreement sets out. And, you know, clearly we have differing views to some extent on the role of oil and gas, but we have an agreement that we must accelerate that transition to net zero, and that's what we are determined to do.
I will reiterate.
For many Green Party members, it's not simplistic. It's a red line as to whether or not you oppose development of the Campbell oil field. If you can't say you're against it, why should they trust you?
I think Green Party members are perfectly, and SNP members are perfectly capable of listening to what I say and hearing what I say. I set out last week that I do think there is a significant question over the continuation of developing new fields, and therefore I have asked those who hold the power to look carefully at that, and that is the position I take, and I think people can understand that even if I don't use the simplistic language that you're inviting me to use. Lorna.
I want to reiterate what the First Minister has said about this not being a devolved matter. This isn't something that we are going to be able to decide and implement in Scotland. But what I can say is that I'd like to acknowledge the First Minister's direction on this, that she has made, I think, a significant change in direction on her approach to oil and gas with the statement that she's put out last week. And this is a big step in the right direction. The Scottish Greens are unequivocally against Cambo, but our hands are tied while we're not an independent country, and we just don't have those powers. So we will continue to work to try and get those powers to do what the Scottish Greens think needs to be done.
Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, yes, of course, Greens oppose Cambo and have long challenged the idea that, ongoing maximum economic extraction can be compatible with the response to the global climate emergency. But I do want to recognise that the First Minister has changed position on this. That's really important. And I don't think that's the end of the story, because I think every political party across the spectrum is going to have to change long-held positions on the oil and gas industry. We need to do that in a way that invests in the communities that are currently dependent on that industry, gives them a real economic prospect for the future, and hope rather than simply the fear that can come with the prospect of change. And this deal does include serious investment for the communities that would be affected, both in terms of transition technologies and other forms of investment as well. So there's a great deal to be optimistic about in this agreement as we commit ourselves to rapidly transitioning. That transition has to be just and it has to be fast, and that's what this agreement says.
£500 million transition deal for the northeast of Scotland and Moray is set out in this agreement. In fact, let me take the opportunity today to challenge the UK government to match that so that we can accelerate that transition. It must be a transition that is just for jobs, for communities, also to make sure that as we reduce reliance on fossil fuel, we don't increase our reliance on importing fossil fuels. But this agreement is serious about making sure that transition is just, but also that it happens at a pace that is necessary to protect our planet. Ewan Petrie from STV.
Thanks, First Minister. Patrick Harvey mentioned COP26 in his first answer. I was just wanting to ask you, in terms of numbers, you're actually in a stronger position now than you were in the last Parliament. So as well as creating a more stable government, how much of this is about enhancing your party's green credentials ahead of that climate conference taking place? And to the Greens, if you haven't received a clear guarantee that the Scottish Government will explicitly oppose new oil fields like Cambo going ahead, is 2 ministerial jobs really a price worth paying?
Our credentials on the environment will be judged by what we do, and I think that is true for any government, and I think all leaders of governments, of political parties should be pressed and challenged and judged, and that is true of us as is of everyone else. There is no doubt that this agreement is about making sure, amongst many other things, that the Scottish Government is challenging itself to go as far and as fast as possible towards net zero, and we will certainly do that. But the judgment on the credentials are not about who's sitting around a ministerial table. The judgment on our environmental credentials and delivery is on what we do, and that's a responsibility I take extremely seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, Ewan, that if power over licensing was devolved, this might have been a more complicated discussion to have. It might have been taken a bit longer to reach agreement. But look, the opportunity here is to start taking faster and more ambitious action on the things that are within our control. We can decarbonise heating and transport. We can invest in a fairer and more just society and make sure that that recovery from COVID is a green recovery and the transition away from oil and gas is a just transition. There's so much that the Scottish Parliament and Government are able to do, and I think we can do more if we work together where we have common ground and respect our differences where those disagreements continue. That's what this agreement will do, and I think it would be a real missed opportunity if the Greens decided that we weren't going to commit ourselves to the actions that are possible to achieve that transformational change.
Brian Rutherford from Birr.
Thank you. Question to the Scottish Greens. Have you sold yourselves out for a bit of power, and will you become the new Nick Cleggs of Scottish politics? And then to both parties, can I ask, is this the beginning of the end for the oil and gas sector, that SNP cash cow argument for independence?
That's a bit ironic. As an SNP politician, I've been getting told by unionist politicians for years that oil is running out and couldn't be relied on to fund or in any way contribute to an independent Scotland. So it's been amusing, if nothing else, to see them abruptly shift position over the past period. In answer to your question, we are in a transition away from fossil fuels. The world has to be in a transition away from fossil fuels. I want to see the skills, the infrastructure, the expertise that has built up over decades in the northeast of Scotland and in the North Sea transfer to building up that same infrastructure that we need in renewable energy. So, of course, that transition is underway. The challenge is to make sure we do that transition in a way that is just, but also in a way that is at pace for the interests of the planet. That's what the SNP is committed to, and that's what I think this agreement will help us deliver. I'll pass over to perhaps Lorna next. All I can say in terms of the negotiations is that they are tough negotiators. I've learned from experience in the past few weeks.
So this deal has not yet gone to a vote before the members of the Scottish Green Party, so the power is with them to decide if this agreement, with its commitments to reduce traffic by investing in railways, by putting huge amounts of money, significant money into things like active travel, upgrading Scotland's homes, all these key sources of emissions, they will also do things like reduce people's bills and improve quality of life, are what they're looking for. But it is up to the members to make that decision. As a former engineer in the renewables industry, I can tell you how much potential Scotland has to develop its renewable energy. We have 25% of all the offshore renewable energy in Europe. That is massive. By developing that potential, we can create tens of thousands of good quality jobs and all the energy we need and more that we can export. We have a successful industry waiting to grow, and this deal would help to accelerate that.
There was a brief question there about Nick Clegg. Nick Clegg went into an election campaign telling half the country, vote for us, we're the only way to get rid of your Tory MP. And then he put those same Conservatives into power. This is a fundamentally different agreement. Not only is it not a coalition in the traditional sense, in that we've said what we agree on and what we don't agree on, but the action that's going to be taken forward under this shared programme is genuinely exciting to both parties. And I think comparisons with the guy who now makes his money from Facebook, I don't think hold up at all.
You know, politics is about debate, it's about division, it's about clash of ideas. But I think one of the problems with modern politics is that it focuses too much on the areas parties disagree on. This agreement is trying to flip that over and accepting that we have disagreements on a range of different things, but we also agree on a number of things. So we are choosing to focus on what we agree on to make maximum progress for the people that we have been elected to serve. That may be something that in recent times in UK politics, even unfortunately in Scottish politics, feels a bit novel. But I think it's what the vast majority of people want and expect from their politicians. And I think it's something to be excited about, particularly given the scale of the challenges that we face over the years to come. Tom Eden from PA.
Thanks, Minister. The Scottish Green Manifesto wanted an end of new oil and gas exploration and undeveloped licences revoked, but this agreement doesn't get anywhere close. I know it's devolved. And Lorna Slater talks about you having had a change of direction. but you won't say whether you support or oppose Cambo oil field. Do you think, well, do the Green members here think that the Green members will support that deal and can swallow it? And what ministerial posts are you considering offering?
We're focused in this agreement on what we agree on, and that includes on oil and gas and the transition away from fossil fuels to renewables. And we've set out already our positions on these things. I'll ask Lorna and Patrick if they wish to say any more on that. In terms of ministerial posts, we have not yet discussed or agreed that. That will come, I'm sure, over the next few days. And of course, as has already been alluded to, both of our parties will have a process of consideration and scrutiny of this agreement in the course of the next week as well. Patrick, Lorna, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues around oil and gas, the devolved and reserved issues have been well addressed. I've said very clearly that I think all political parties, in or out of government, need to be on this journey toward a recognition of the global reality that we all face. The transition away from fossil fuels is a challenge. It's also an incredible opportunity. And I think this agreement's only been published for half an hour or so. Tom will have more time to read it. Everybody, including our party members and everybody in Scotland, will have more time to read it. And I think people will see a huge amount of positive detail that opens up opportunities for making Scotland not just greener, but fairer as well.
I think it's interesting that you bring up the Scottish Greens manifesto, because I actually think that with this agreement, should it be agreed by our members, we have more opportunities to implement more of our manifesto than we ever have. Every manifesto is written as a document of intention, whereas this agreement is a document for delivery. That's a powerful thing, and I think that the Scottish Green members will be excited by the idea that we can actually deliver everything that's in this document. It's been looked at by civil servants, it's had its due diligence, we know we can do these things. And it's by working together that we get these things done. It's a new type of politics, and I expect people to be really excited about the outcomes.
Thank you. Gina Davidson from the Scotsman.
Hi, thanks very much, First Minister. Can I ask if the deal was agreed unanimously at Cabinet today? And given that the Green Party members are having a say on whether or not they approve it, will it be put to SNP conference, and will members be able to vote or ratify any of it next month?
It was agreed unanimously by Cabinet today, and I will take the agreement, set out the agreement to the SNP's National Executive Committee tomorrow. It is for the National Executive Committee to decide what process of consultation will be undertaken over the next few days, but I would hope and expect that to be the fullest possible consultation. I'm excited about this agreement. Lorna made a comment that I thought was an extremely good one a moment ago, and it resonates with me because I spent a long time in my younger days in politics in opposition. You don't get to deliver very much of your manifesto from the opposition benches. You have to be in government to get things done and make Scotland a better place. And I know that SNP members want to continue to tackle the climate emergency. We want to make Scotland a fairer and better place. And of course, we want to secure an independence referendum. So I think there'll be a lot of enthusiasm and excitement on the part of SNP members. And I look forward to engaging in those discussions in the days to come. I don't think there was a question to either of you there. Yeah, Paul Hutchin from the Daily Record.
Hi, it's a question for Patrick and for Lorna. In the Scottish Green Manifesto, you said on income tax that those who can contribute more should. You also backed a windfall tax on pandemic profits, and also you called for the abolition of the council tax. Are any of these policies in the agreement?
Well, thanks, Paul. I think at the election we said that now isn't the time for immediate changes to income tax. And I think given the economic impact that many households have been living with as a result of the pandemic, people would understand that. But we have said that there needs to be a longer term and really deep re-examination of the tax system. And we talked about the use of citizens' assemblies as one of the really positive, engaging ways that you can cut through the party political dynamic, which sometimes is a reason why things don't get done. So one of the things in this agreement is the use of a citizens' assembly on taxation, looking in the first instance at local taxation as Paul, as you know, we've worked really, really hard to keep pushing the issue of local tax reform. And I think putting some of those questions into the hands of members of the public on a citizens' assembly is the most effective way that we can cut through that and get change that will not only fund our local services properly, but be fairer as well.
So the bottom line, Patrick, is that no income tax rises for wealthy people, no windfall tax on pandemic profits, and no abolition of the council tax. So isn't it the case you're just letting the wealthy off the hook?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. And it's probably a little early even for Paul to be asking for budget leaks just yet. The budget will come later in the year, and we look forward to working together in a spirit of constructive challenge on that process.
Okay. Libby Brooks from The Guardian.
Thank you. In the text on Gender Recognition Act reform, it refers to a simplified process, and I just wanted to ask, does that mean bringing in self-identification? Thanks.
The gender recognition bill, we have said, in fact the SNP said in our manifesto, we would introduce at the earliest opportunity. This agreement says that the bill will be introduced in the first year, and simplifying the process is about making the process of gender recognition easier for those who want to go through it. People can change gender legally already, but the process is cumbersome. It is lengthy, it is deeply traumatic, and this is about simplifying that. Obviously, the detail of any legislation is for Parliament to properly scrutinise and determine, but the intention to make this much simpler for those going through the process is very clear. Obviously, this is an issue that is debated hotly, but I think it is really important that we recognise that trans people are some of the most stigmatised in our communities and act to improve that in any way we can. Either of you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've often, over the course of the last parliamentary session, had cause to reflect on the fact that not in this year's Holyrood election, but the one 5 years before that, all political parties made a promise to enact this legislation. And a great many people in Scotland do feel that absolutely needs to be done. No more delays. A draft bill has already been consulted on during the last session, and I look forward very strongly to seeing that introduced to Parliament and, as the First Minister says, scrutinised in the normal way.
Andy Phillip from P&G.
Hello, I just wondered, the Green Party members are getting a say on what this looks like in practice. How will the SNP's wider membership be consulted, if at all? Will they have a say in what's coming from today?
As I said a moment ago, Andy, I don't know if you can hear the answers to the other questions. The National Executive Committee of the SNP meets tomorrow morning. I will present the agreement to them, and the National Executive Committee will decide the detail of the process of scrutiny and consultation that will take place over the next few days. I will be recommending that is very extensive, but I will not preempt the decision that the National Executive Committee takes. Michael Blackley from the Daily Mail.
Thank you, Minister. If I could just maybe ask you regarding some of the comments that the two people standing next to you have made about capitalism in the past. Patrick Harvey has said that capitalism is not sustainable and must end. Lorna Slater said during the last election campaign that the Greens are an anti-capitalism party. What message does it send out to businesses and entrepreneurs that you have now invited them, at least their party, into government? And just to follow up on Paul's question on tax, there will be a working group with the Scottish Government and the Greens looking at council tax reform. Will it consider an alternative to council tax based on property valuation, as was proposed in the Green Manifesto? Thank you.
I know this frustrates the Daily Mail hugely, but I tend to think if you propose a process of consultation, particularly through a model like a citizens' assembly, you should not preempt it and prejudge it in every respect. I think Patrick is right, and the Greens have argued for this. And You know, at times the SNP has been frustrated over our years in government at not being able to make more progress on local tax reform. I think everybody accepts the council tax is not the best form of local taxation. We have always struggled across the political spectrum to agree on what is the best alternative. So the proposal in this agreement for a citizens' assembly, I think, is a good one and a strong one, and we should allow that process to take its course. Look, you know, I'm sure the Daily Mail will, you know, print acres of pages over the days to come, and I'm not sure it will make any great difference to anything, to be perfectly honest, but of comments that Patrick and Lorna have made that I wouldn't agree with, and comments that I've made that Lorna and Patrick wouldn't agree with. You know, that's, in a sense, that's the kind of politics I think people just want to get away from. It is no secret that we disagree on many things, but we actually agree on many things. So we've decided to turn traditional politics on its head, and instead of throwing brickbats at each other about things we don't agree on, we've decided to focus on the things we do agree on and the areas where we can work together constructively to make Scotland an even better place. And I think that actually the majority of people will find that quite refreshing. And at the heart of that is the need to build a fair, inclusive, sustainable economy with businesses that are able to grow and to thrive, but also businesses that, as many across Scotland already do, pay their workers a fair wage, make sure that they have fair work embedded in what they do. And that vision of an economy, I think, is one, again, that many businesses support and indeed many people across Scotland support. I've always rejected the notion of having a strong economy on the one hand and a fair society on the other hand as competing imperatives. We need to do both, and that's what I'll continue to do what I can to progress. And I welcome having the challenge of the Greens, I hope, in government to make sure that as we take these decisions, we've got the needs of the planet firmly in focus as well. Because unless we heed that code red warning for humanity, then so many of these discussions and debates and arguments that we have become increasingly abstract because our planet, frankly, is in grave danger. So all of this, I think, tells us that we should focus on where we can work together constructively, and that won't necessarily enthuse everybody and every corner of Scotland, but I think the majority will welcome it.
I'm very excited that you've mentioned business. I think there's a lot in this agreement which is terrific for business. The Scottish Greens are not against business. We're against businesses that exploit their workers, that don't pay taxes, that damage the environment. Responsible businesses we're very excited about, and this agreement talks about supporting cooperatives. It talks about supporting social enterprises, businesses that we know have a strong history of paying fair wages, as well as making sure that the profits they earn go straight back into the communities, into the pockets of Scottish people, not disappearing into offshore tax havens where they can't help our economy. We also have a vision that is outlined in this agreement for a green industrial strategy. I think Scotland has enormous potential to redevelop our heavy industry so we can build all the tidal turbines, wind turbines, ferries, all this big stuff, new railways, all the stuff we can build in Scotland. And I think that's a very exciting future. I think the economy of Scotland can be a key part of not only creating an enormous number of jobs, but tackling the climate crisis at the same time. So I think business should be very optimistic about this agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add that everybody, looking around our own communities, we can all see the impact that the pandemic has had on our economy. And even before that, we can see the extraordinary inequality and environmental destruction that's been brought about over decades, many decades. The opportunity that we have now, though, is to ask ourselves what kind of economy we're going to build anew. And we can either, retreat to ideological corners and start, complaining about things that you said or I said years ago, or we can work together with creativity and with passion and actually unleashing the creativity and the passion of communities to rebuild their own local economies as well. I think there's an incredible opportunity to get this right and build a better economy than the one that went before.
Dan Vevers from The Sun.
Thank you, First Minister. Oil and gas licences are reserved to Westminster, as you've mentioned, but on your timetable you want to see Scotland become independent with full powers within a few years, and all three of you here share that ambition. But given the immediate threat of the climate crisis, would you cease, or at least strongly consider ceasing, further North Sea exploration in an independent Scotland? And to the Greens, do you intend to keep your slot as the third opposition party at the First Minister's questions and other Hollywood statements and debates? And how does that square?
On the first question, look, I hope Scotland is independent with full power soon, because that will allow us to take the decisions then.
Would it not be a case of looking to have it?
Sorry, I, with apologies, Dan, you've been coming in and out there, so I thought you'd stopped, and that's why I started talking over you. But I didn't hear the last part of your question. I'm not sure if Patrick and Lorna did. Yeah. On the question to me, look, I hope Scotland is independent sooner rather than later with the full power, so that when we are, we can take the decisions that are right. I think the challenge between now and then, which is what this agreement helps to advance, is to accelerate the transition, the just transition we need to see in order that we can protect the planet. And I am very enthusiastic about the plans that are set out here to do just that. On the question for the Greens, I don't know who wants to take that.
I can take that one. So the questions at FMQs is the prerogative of the presiding officer of the Parliament. It's not something we can decide.
Simon Johnson from The Telegraph.
Thank you, First Minister. I just wanted to follow up on Glenn's question, really. You said it was now impossible for the UK government to refuse an independence referendum. The deal says that this will accelerate an independence referendum. But isn't that hyperbole? I mean, there's no sign at all the UK government changing its mind over this. And if it isn't hyperbole, can you explain exactly why this will accelerate an independence referendum? And to Patrick and Lorna, if I may, one of the exemptions to the deal is over the role of measuring GDP in economic policy. With Scotland's economic recovery, one of the top things on the to-do list. Can you explain why you didn't feel you could sign up to that, and what practical difference it will make in terms of how you guys will work together on economic policy? Thank you.
Why do I think that this should accelerate progress towards securing an independence referendum when the Scottish Parliament judges the time is right for that, I hasten to add, is because I'm a Democrat, and that may be, and I believe in democratic principles. I lead a party that won the recent Scottish election on an overwhelming mandate to offer the people of Scotland that choice, and I'm flanked here by Green colleagues who, on a similar platform, also scored, I think, their best election result ever in the Scottish election. So, we have a majority in Parliament already for that independence referendum, and if this deal is agreed and if this deal is implemented, then we will have a majority government, effectively, that supports an independence referendum. Frankly, the question on this should not be for us. We're simply asking for democracy to be respected. The question should be directed at those who want to stand in the way of democracy. As I've always said, it is entirely right and proper that those who have differing views on the question of whether Scotland should be independent argue those passionately, and that is the way things happen in a democracy. What is just not acceptable, and I don't believe will be sustained or sustainable, is for any politician to stand in the way of the democratic decision, and that is a view that I don't just think is right. It is a view that I believe will prevail.
I'd like to answer the question about the GDP. So this is, you're right, in the agree to disagree list. I've spoken to the Cabinet Secretary and she will continue to use GDP to measure Scotland's economic progress, whereas the Scottish Greens don't believe that growth is a sensible measure to use on a finite planet. That's an area we disagree on. However, what I'm very excited about in this agreement is that there is a proposal to create a dashboard of metrics for a well-being economy. Some other countries already have these, such that we can start measuring. I'm an engineer. You can't change things unless you can measure them. So if we can start having in place formal metrics for how we measure the well-being of the people in Scotland, that's the first practical step towards building an economy that improves those metrics. And in time, we would hope to persuade the government to make that change, but we're not there yet.
And broadening the metrics is something that the Scottish Government has already been doing and agrees wholeheartedly with. We're one of the founding governments in the Wellbeing Alliance with New Zealand and Iceland. Wales has, and others, Finland I think, have now joined that. So that is, I think, a really important direction of travel.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that, you know, Greens have been one of the longest-standing voices on the political spectrum criticising the idea that everlasting economic growth can happen on a finite planet, but also questioning whether GDP tells us anything meaningful. It doesn't tell us who's benefiting from economic activity. It doesn't tell us anything about how fair, how healthy, or how sustainable our world is, or how decent our jobs are, the quality of jobs. So there's a great deal that it doesn't do. But actually, I think a lot of political parties, as we've been facing up to the fact that the world is already at the limit and beyond the limit in some cases of sustainability and needs to change, I think all parties are going to have to recognise that a new way of understanding what a healthy, successful economy is beyond growth, that's a change that I think is going to happen across the political spectrum. And the wellbeing agenda in this agreement, I think, marks a decisive step in that direction, not the end of the journey.
The penultimate question is Abby Garton from The National.
Thank you, First Minister. I just wanted to ask you, first of all, independence referendums listed as a top priority in the draft cooperation agreement. So what ways would the Scottish Greens and SNPs work together in government to prepare for that referendum? And could you explain a little bit about that and when that would begin? And for Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater, I just wanted to know a little bit about why green ports aren't in the agreement, and that's one of the ones that you don't agree on. I just have a little bit more information on that. Good, thank you.
We'll work together to prepare. We don't have identical visions for an independent Scotland. I think we saw that in the 2014 referendum, but we'll have the opportunity to work together to develop the case for independence. As I said during the election, while we are still in the acute crisis phase of the global pandemic, that has to take priority for the government, and we see even in today's COVID figures that we're seeing a rise in cases again, and that reminds us of the importance of that. But we are also, and I am determined that we advance the case for independence to give people in Scotland the choice, you know, a referendum for recovery, so that we equip our Parliament and our people with the powers to build the kind of recovery we want from COVID is absolutely essential. Which one of you wants to? Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, green ports are listed as an area where the Scottish Greens and the Scottish Government don't agree. I'm sure the Scottish Government would want to draw attention to the things that they do want to add into the model of green ports around fair work and climate targets and so on. I think from the green point of view, we still see it as fundamentally built on top of the free port model, which is essentially about exempting certain types of economic activity from the tax base and from planning and environmental regulations in some cases. So we have a disagreement about whether that's of any real value to our society and whether it creates any additional quality economic activity as opposed to just moving it around. So yeah, that's an area we'll continue to disagree on, but I hope that we'll express our disagreements in as challenging but constructive a manner as we can.
Thank you. And the last question today comes from David Ball from the Herald.
Thank you, First Minister. Firstly, to the Green leaders, are you concerned at all that your party could be sort of punished at the next election, as we've seen previously in albeit more formal coalitions? You've managed to hold sort of the balance of power on big education votes and big key decisions. Why are you now sort of happy to give that up? And secondly, this morning Douglas Ross said this deal was anti-family. I was just wondering what the leaders thought Douglas Ross meant by that comment and whether you agree with him.
I can start on this one. Green parties around the world have entered government in countries like Germany, like New Zealand, very successfully, with very successful outcomes for the parties, because they were able to deliver on priorities not only for their members, but for the voters at large. Things about tackling the climate crisis and making economies sustainable. And that is exactly what I expect our outcome to be as well, that we will demonstrate our capability. I assume the First Minister has brought us in for our expertise on climate, and we will demonstrate that we can deliver on that during this agreement. I hope if our members approve it. Sorry, I've forgotten the second question. Douglas Ross. Well, yeah. Well, I think we know what Douglas Ross is suggesting. The Scottish Green Party are a party that are very strong on LGBTQ plus rights. And I think that what Douglas Ross has said is a dog whistle for people who are less in favour of those rights.
I don't, it's for Douglas Ross to explain what Douglas Ross meant. I'm not making any inference there, but Lorna's right. That phrase anti-family is a well-known dog whistle for people who want to criticise gay rights. To a lesser extent, people who want to take a dig at women who don't have children. It's pretty nasty. Now, if Douglas Ross didn't mean that, then I hope he takes the opportunity to say that and clarify that, and maybe explain what he did mean, because I can't think of the rational explanation for that rather unpleasant phrase.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to hope that that's not what he meant and that he'll reflect on it. But if the Scottish Green Party members vote for this agreement and the SNP's executive decides that it's going to approve it or as well, or consult its members, if this is approved, if this is implemented, if we deliver what's in this agreement, there will be families up and down this country who will be paying fairer rents, who will be seeing the cost of school uniforms come down, who will be seeing their energy bills come down. There'll be families who see investment in their communities and public transport services that they can actually rely on and are available to them, and a host of other things that will help families and all households across Scotland, all citizens across Scotland in every community. So, I think families and everybody else across Scotland can look at this deal for themselves and see that there's going to be something in there that will make many of our lives a great deal better.
I think that's a good place to end. I would encourage anybody watching to go to the Scottish Government website. You can download the draft shared policy agreement, the cooperation agreement, and see the detail of it. I believe that this will bring benefits to people across Scotland, and people will see the progress we can make when parties decide to focus not on what divides them, but instead on what they agree on. And I look forward, I hope, to working with the Scottish Greens over this parliamentary term to deliver that greener, fairer, independent Scotland. Thank you all very much indeed.